Thanks so much for joining us today. As I said in my YouTube invitation to you, we think we are your peeps.
Oh, great.
So I'm going to ask some questions, and then we will have some opportunity for questions from the audience. In your TED Talk, which I really enjoyed, you said that discovery requires us to boil things down to their fundamental truths and reason up from there. So that's a mindset that you live every day. For a lot of us, when we think about what could be, we often get stopped by obstacles and what the impediments are. And you have clearly blown through those. So how do you think about that, and how do you focus on getting by those obstacles?
Well, I'm a big believer in the sort of science or physics framework of trying to analyze problems, particularly if they're new. So if something's new, then analogies don't work very well because it's new. I mean, the way we get through daily life is mostly by analogy or by sort of copying things with minor variations because it's a computational shortcut. But if you want to do something that's fundamentally new, or particularly if it's counterintuitive, then you have to do a first principles analysis and take things from what appeared to be as fundamental, sort of simple fundamental truths, and then reason up from there. I mean that requires a lot more sort of thinking, and you can't do that for everything. But if you're trying to figure out something new, I think it's really the only way to go.
So I mentioned that I was in Paris, and I know that you were there too. And as I listened to presentations, first there was a real sense of optimism at this COP that I don't think was there before, but there was still an overwhelming sense of a lot of work that we have to do. And I was struck by some comments that you made when you were talking to a group of students at the Sorbonne, and they were talking about sustainability. And you said regarding the carbon cycle, this is analogous to not paying for garbage collection. It's not as though we should say in the case of garbage, have a garbage-free society. It's very difficult to have a garbage-free society, but it's just important that people pay for the garbage collection. So we need to go from having an untaxed negative externality, which is effectively a hidden carbon subsidy of enormous size, 5.3 trillion a year, and we need to move away from this and have a carbon tax. So can you talk a little bit about that, especially from the standpoint of being in private enterprise?
Yeah, I mean, essentially, prices are just information. The primary information to allow for labor allocation. And I mean, they sort of tell people what to do and what things should be favored over another thing. And so when the prices are wrong, then the wrong thing happens in the economy. So when you have sort of a tragedy of the commons, like the CO2 capacity of the oceans and atmosphere, and it's unpriced, or the price is much lower than it should be, then the wrong behavior happens. So effectively, we're incenting bad behavior. I mean, I just talked about how analogies are imperfect, but it's kind of like if we had high taxes on fruits and vegetables and low taxes on cigarettes and alcohol. That wouldn't make sense. But that's sort of what we have right now with respect to energy, and we're very powerful forces trying to keep it that way. Now it will eventually correct, and we are seeing some good movement in that direction with the Paris climate talks. It sounds like it's directionally correct, and there'll be some movement. Not as much as there should be, but it's encouraging. I mean, I think it's worth noting that, like, generally, when the government interferes in the economy, that usually results in a pricing error increase. But in this case, I think it's hard to miss. Like any sort of carbon tax would reduce the effective error in the system of prices in the economy.
Yeah. I'd like to shift directions. While we are a research community, we're also an education community. And we have crowdsourced some questions for today's event, and one of them comes from the education community. So this came to us on Twitter from Regina Brinker, at Brinker Science, if you want to follow her. And she says, I teach middle school STEM. What should students be learning to be prepared for and contribute to the future workforce?
Well, I think, software engineering is probably the single biggest area that people should learn. And I think I'm always sort of a fan of physics and general economics and critical thinking. I think we really should teach critical thinking a lot more. Because people, yeah. That may seem like a simple thing, but it's just like you need to just tell people like this is how you know whether you should believe something or not. Yeah, it's like
you can tell how much everybody resonates with that here.
I think I'm preaching to the converted here.
Yeah.
It's just teaching people these are the general types of fallacies, and this is how people will generally trick you, and how to avoid being tricked, and that kind of thing. It'd be really great.
It would. Yeah. It would. Let's do it. At the fall meeting here, we also try to stress the importance of transdisciplinary research and how science informs other areas like policy and so forth. So another question we received from Twitter came from Lori Ziolkowski. She's at Extra Neutrons, who asked, so you didn't mention geoscience in that list of things that people should know about.
Sure. I do think geoscience is very important, let me be clear.
What do the engineers of the future need to know from geosciences? And how do we influence that and work together?
I think in general, I think that it would be good in general for people to know about geosciences and to know how our actions as a civilization will affect the future, and how we can positively affect it, how we might be negatively affecting it. On the assumption that we want the future to be good, we want to direct our actions to, with respect to geosciences, to a good outcome. Generally, it's sort of quite surprising how little actually people know about geosciences. I mean, even like pretty straightforward stuff like the carbon cycle. I've had conversations with quite smart and well-read people who don't understand that there's like a surface carbon cycle, but if you dig stuff up from deep underground and add it to the surface carbon cycle, that fundamentally changes the chemical equilibrium of the surface of the Earth. And they're like, wow, really? Yeah, definitely. There's just conservation of mass is not totally obvious to people. Okay. You can't just create new carbon from nothing. You have to get it from somewhere.
Just disappear.
Yeah, it doesn't disappear. Yeah, exactly. So, just like basic stuff like that would be great to educate people on.
Terrific. We're sort of bouncing around, but I have some, we got great input from all of you when we ask for questions, and I want to make sure we try to touch on a lot of different topics. So I want to talk about the roles of the private and public sector in ensuring the advancement of scientific research and innovation. And where do you see the roles of the private sector versus the public sector? Are there places where they overlap? Are
Sure.
they totally separate?
Yeah, I think the public sector is when you have something that's kind of a small amount of good for the whole population, or for the whole country, or even the whole world. But it would be really difficult to go and collect like $10 from everyone to understand more about the nature of the Earth or the solar system or the universe. So it's not efficient to go to try and sort of collect sort of this. If you've got, say, a $3 billion project, to go and get $10 from everyone in the United States, it's like it's better to do that via the public sector. But then you have great things like the Hubble, and I think most people would say that's quite a good thing, or the Mars missions. So I think. Where you have these things which are a small amount of good for a lot of people, it makes sense for the public sector for government to do that. Where you can more concretely close the economic loop, that's where the private sector makes sense. So, for example, at SpaceX we do a lot of launches of communications and broadcast satellites. And then that can sort of close the economic loop, because then people can listen to XM radio or get DirecTV or something like that, and that kind of makes sense. But then we'll also do missions for NASA to resupply the space station, so we can sort of learn more about living in space, and that makes sense as a public sector thing. So I think that's the basic difference.
So in that public sector, not only geoscience, but a lot of science is seeing very flat funding at a time when other nations are investing, at a time when there's tremendous opportunity. How do you think that the private sector can help us turn that around and focus on, what the benefits will be for society, for public sector investment in research?
Well, I'm certainly a proponent of increasing investment in science in general, from both the public and private sector, and I'm a super pro science. So it is it's interesting to see the Large Hadron Collider. That was really a great effort there in Europe. But we sort of canceled the superconducting super collider here in the U.S. I thought that was sort of a sad thing that we did there. I really think we should increase funding for science, absolutely. Across the world, really.
Right. We have the director of the National Science Foundation in the front row here. I'm sure she's in violent agreement.
Yeah, I mean, definitely.
So you mentioned Mars, and in your interview with Stephen Colbert, you said that Mars is a fixer-upper planet.
Yeah, exactly. needs some work.
But you've also been a proponent of colonizing Mars. What are some of the challenges that you think we would face in traveling to Mars? I know you're very interested in this. How do you think about that?
Sure. Well, I think first of all I should say, why do I think this is important? And that's if I sort of unpack the sort of philosophical basis for that, as far as I'm concerned, it's the reason I came to that conclusion was that I think that we don't. There's so much more to understand and learn about the nature of the universe. And that understanding will grow kind of proportionate to the scope and scale of human civilization. The probable lifespan of human civilization is much greater if we are a multi-planet species as opposed to a single-planet species. If we're a single-planet species, then eventually there will be some extinction event, either from humans or some natural thing. So I think, and now is the first time in the history of Earth that the window is opened, where it's possible for us to extend life to another planet. I mean, it's been 4.5 billion years, so it's a long time. And that window may be open for a long time, and hopefully it is, but it may also be open for a short time. And so I think the wise move is to make life multiplanetary while we can. And this ultimately is what will lead to a huge amount of new science, and ensure that we have the highest probability of understanding the nature of the universe. So that's actually the reason that I think it's important. And I also think it would be a great adventure. And there need to be things that people look forward to when you wake up in the morning. Like it's exciting and inspiring, and we need those things.
Yeah, I'm old enough to remember the landing on the moon and getting up that day and thinking about that, and just the change.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, great point.
So, but it will be super hard to do this, and it will take a long time, and I suspect I probably won't live to see it become self-sustaining. But if we are to aim for that objective, then there are important technological steps that are needed to get there. One of them, for example, being reusable rockets. If we have reusable rockets, we can reduce the cost of access to space by probably 2 orders of magnitude. And it's worth noting that for the Falcon 9, which is about a $16 million rocket to build, the cost of the propellant is only about $200,000. So, it's much like refueling like a 747 or something like that. So it's really a massive difference if we can make reusability work. And then we also need scale. We need to have really big rockets, and then you need to do local propellant production on Mars. So if we can do those things, then I think we can establish a self-sustaining civilization on Mars.
So I understand that you're going to be launching your newest rocket next week.
Right.
And this is the first launch since the Falcon 9 back in June. And I've lost some scientific gear that was pretty expensive in the ocean. And I know what that feels like. Maybe not, maybe I don't know how it scales. But, if this is successful, it's clearly historic. And how do you think about that issue of, failing forward?
Failing forward. Well, I think I'd much prefer success forward.
Of course.
But yeah, it's I think it's quite emotionally traumatic actually, and yeah, the last flight which failed actually did so on my birthday, which is really a bit of a downer. Yeah. So yeah, I mean it's rockets are hard, I have to say.
Yeah.
I mean, if gravity was just a little lighter, it would be much easier. Actually, if gravity was a little stronger on Earth, it would be basically impossible to do with chemical rockets. It's amazing how much gravity affects things. I mean, like it's a small change in G, and it's like, wow. But you can look at, say, the Saturn V, which was like the size of the first time I think anyone's done it is deeply cryogenic propellant. So we're subcooling the propellant, particularly the liquid oxygen, because it's 2/3 liquid oxygen, close to its freezing point, which increases the density quite significantly. And then the thrust is higher. We've an improved stage separation system. We stretched the upper stage of the rocket to add more propellant to that. And there are a number of other improvements in electronics. So I think a significantly improved rocket from the last one. And then I should say, what is important about reusability as far as the boost stage is concerned? The key sort of figure of merit is the transfer energy. So if you take the potential energy and the kinetic energy and say how much has been transferred to the alpha stage by the boost stage, and what's the mass that, so it's basically kinetic energy and potential energy transferred. That's the thing that's the figure of merit. So the boost stage of Falcon 9 is capable of a transfer velocity to the alpha stage of 8,000 kilometers an hour. So that's pretty fast.
Yep.
So a bullet from an assault rifle, it goes at 2,000 kilometers an hour. So it's 4 times faster than a bullet from an assault rifle. That's a transfer velocity at roughly 100 kilometers. And to a mass of about 120 tons. So it's accelerating 120 tons to 4 times faster than a bullet.
I loved the way that you just compared something that people wouldn't have any conception of to something that they would, and that they would be really impressed by.
Yeah.
I mean, was that amazing communication? That was terrific. Yeah. I wanted to ask you one last question, and then we're going to throw things open for the audience. When you talked about Mars, you said, "I don't think I'll ever get there."
Well,
and
yeah.
What? Can you talk a little about, a lot of us get involved in projects that we don't know if we'll see the realization.
Sure.
And can you talk a little bit about how you think about that and trading off, I get to do it versus it'll come later?
Well, going back to the sort of underlying sort of philosophical rationale for doing it in the first place, basically I sort of was thinking about this when I was a kid and trying to find some meaning in life, like what's the meaning of life, and I got quite sort of sad about it actually when I was a teenager, and then I read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which basically said like basically the universe is the answer, and you just need to figure out the questions. So I think, that's if I can help kind of figure out the questions, then I consider that to be meaningful.
Absolutely, and maybe we can all use a babble fish as well.
Right, exactly.
Okay, now it's time for you, and I'm going to go, we're going to alternate between questions from the audience and questions from no, Joan, we won't, okay, just the audience. Okay, so it's your turn. Questions for Elon. Please come to the microphones that are in the aisles, and there's somebody at this microphone. Go ahead.
Thank you very much for appearing today. 2 weeks ago, the Los Angeles Times featured prominently on its front page a story in which it described many self-described venture capitalists from this area who were enamored by a new and as yet unspecified technique of nuclear power generation. It did not, it was promised in the article that the technique was different than those demonstrated at 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl, and Fukushima. I'd like to ask if you had what your critical thinking skills would be when approached by people offering you to invest or become involved in new and undefined nuclear power techniques. Do you know what they're talking about? And two, what do you see as the future for nuclear power in our efforts to restore the Earth to the conditions that it might have existed more closely at the start of the Anthropocene?
Sure. Well, I actually am. I think there's nothing wrong with nuclear power, whether fission or fusion. I think if a properly designed fission power system is actually fine, particularly if it's in an area that's not subject to natural disasters. So, for example, France has a lot of fission power, and that I think makes a lot of sense for them. But for California, it's more questionable, or Japan. So then fusion. I definitely think fusion is a solvable problem. The reason I sort of haven't done anything in direct fusion is that I currently think, and I may be wrong about this, that indirect fusion from the big fusion explosion in the sky called the sun is, and having photovoltaics is probably going to make the most sense economically. And in the high latitudes in the northern hemisphere, you tend to have a lot of hydropower, so that really helps solve the how do you make power when it's dark problem, or in the middle of winter type of thing. So I don't want to discourage people from pursuing fusion, but personally, I think the economics are going to favor indirect fusion of photovoltaics. At least to an overwhelming degree, particularly when combined with batteries and high voltage lines running east-west and north-south. You can completely solve Earth's, all the power needed on Earth with a fairly small percentage of the surface area. For the United States, you could take basically a corner of Utah and Nevada and power the entire United States with solar power. So I think that's mostly how it will get solved.
The next.
Now, this is a bit of a follow-up on that. Solar power has been doubling basically every 2 years, and we all know that exponential growth is a powerful thing. So we're only 7 doublings away from everything being powered by solar power. And do you think that doubling rate will keep pace?
I think it'll probably slow down, but it's still going to be a high percentage growth rate every year. Once you reach a certain percentage of solar into the grid, you really need to add batteries in order to load level and kind of cache power. But solar combined with batteries really, you kind of, like I said, you can completely solve all of Earth's power with just those two things.
Great. Is that Victor?
It's worth noting. I think probably people are aware of this, but you get there's 1 gigawatt per square kilometer of solar energy, solar power.
Right.
I'm Victor Zeker-Smidus, and I'm a massive fan of your work, particularly fighting the carbon pollution. And actually, follow up on this battery question, we tend to start understanding how powerful the carbon pollution is, but battery-related technology and photovoltaics has its own production cycle. And I was wondering if you could maybe share your thoughts on what the consequences and maybe a remediation recycling of that would be.
Yeah, well, all of the battery packs for Tesla are currently recycled. So there are recycling centers in North America and Europe and Asia. And it kind of makes sense because you can just think of the battery packs as really high-quality ore. It's way better to mine a battery pack than rocks. So it kind of makes sense to recycle them economically. And that obviously reduces the cost of production quite a bit. For the Gigafactory that we're building in Nevada, that will have recycling built in, so it'll be completely sort of close that cycle, and it will be in the long term fully sustainably powered, so solar, wind, and geothermal.
And the far microphone.
Hi, I'm Jim Kroll from Arizona State University. I was listening to Dr. Chris McKay, another advocate of Humans to Mars, and he was talking about when we do go to Mars, if we find life either currently there or extinct, we should consider removing human presence so we can allow that life to thrive. I was wondering what your thoughts on that were.
Well, it really doesn't seem like there's any life on Mars. I mean, if they're on the surface at least, we're not seeing any sign of that. I think if we do find some sign of it, then for sure we need to understand, what it is, and try to ensure that we don't extinguish it. I mean, that's important. But I think the reality is that there isn't any life on the surface of Mars. There may be microbial life deep underground, where it's sort of shielded from radiation and from the cold. So that's a possibility. But in that case, I think anything we do on the surface is really not going to have a big impact on the subterranean life. Okay.
Thank you.
Over here again.
Hi. With a decision coming out of COP21 just a few days ago, with the world now appearing to be on track to decarbonize the energy system, renewable energy and, of course, storage is going to become increasingly important, and likely the development will accelerate. I'm really interested in what Tesla's doing on batteries that will help smooth the intermittency of the renewable generation, and would really like to hear your discussion of where you see Tesla going on battery storage for renewables and generally the whole issue of storage for renewables.
Yeah, well, definitely this battery technology is super important to sustainable energy. What we're doing with the big factory that we're building in Nevada is really trying to take economies of scale to the limit. So it's like the biggest factory we could conceive of in order to maximize economies of scale. And then obviously there's the underlying technology itself, which there'll be, I would say, moderate improvements in the underlying technology. Not giant, but not small, but kind of medium. But then over time, I would expect those technology improvements to get better and better. And from Tesla's standpoint, we're always interested in trying to figure out how to make it better. I do think that batteries are one of the hardest technology problems out there, because there's so many constraints on creating a useful battery. It's really, I mean, so many super smart people have broken their pick on improving batteries. So it usually ends up being, on average, like about a 5 to 8% improvement per year in energy density and economics. Although I think we'll be able to improve the economic element a lot more just by the economies of scale. But anyone who's interested in doing batteries, I'd certainly encourage them to research better batteries. It's a super hard problem and a critical one to solve.
Great.
What do you think are the main steps in a low-carbon energy transition? And in that vein, what technologies out there, what technological developments do you find very interesting that you're not already working on? Things that aren't batteries or electric vehicles, that you think are cool areas for people to go into?
Well, I think electrification of transport in general is important. So aircraft and boats, that's pretty important. And then heating and cooling, electrification of that. Yeah, I mean, I think, the nuclear stuff could be quite interesting, but it would just have to sort of see how it competes against solar. But yeah, and anything which any form of energy generation or consumption, which if you extrapolate into the future, goes on for a very long time and still has the world being good, I think we should just do that. Yeah.
Great. Over here.
Good morning. Fuchsia Hoover from Purdue University. My question pertains to science access and energy within the global context. And I was wondering how you see any or all of your companies and ventures trying to address the inequity of science access or access to energy, or what types of things that you're hoping to do within that context to try and really expand those resources and make it accessible to everyone.
Sure. Well, as was mentioned earlier, Tesla has just made all the patents open, and Solar City is actually going even a step further than that, which is they're making the technology available to developing countries, and they're offering to have people come from those countries and actually sit in the factory and see how it's done. So I think trying to be helpful in that respect, but I do think that the internet is a great equalizer of access to information. This is maybe not talked about as much as it should be, but you can learn anything if you have a $100 internet device. You can just learn anything, which is amazing compared to the past. You don't need access to a library. In principle, you could learn whatever you want for free, really. I think that's a pretty great part of the future that we're in right now.
Indeed. In the end?
Hi. Hee-Ho Park from Sandia National Labs. Tesla has done a great job creating an infrastructure for electric cars in the country so far, but I don't think electric cars themselves solve greenhouse gas problems because we're still generating greenhouse gases from coal and natural gas power plants, which are not as efficient as gasoline cars. So how did you originally envision the future source of electricity, and how do you envision it now?
Yeah, actually, it's worth noting that even if the grid was completely powered by coal and natural gas, electric cars would still generate less CO2, even when you take it all the way to the power plant level. The reason for that is that when you're not constrained by mass and volume, you can make the efficiency of energy extraction much better in a power plant than you can in a car. So if you take, say, like a natural gas power plant from GE, it's over 60% efficient. So you take the source energy, 60% efficient in generating electricity. So it's really good. Whereas typically a gasoline-powered car over the drive cycle will be less than 20% efficient. And that's because the big natural gas turbine it can be really heavy, it can be really bulky, and you can take the waste heat and then run a steam turbine and get even more energy out. So your efficiency is just fundamentally much better. And so even when you take into account the transmission losses and the charging losses, you're still way far ahead with electric cars than you are with gasoline cars. So even you can do this with any source fuel, coal, anything. You're just always going to win, even if everything's powered by CO2 sources. Then of course everything isn't powered by CO2 sources. You have hydro, geothermal, solar, wind, and as was pointed out by one of the earlier questioners, the growth of solar is very dramatic. So the percentage of the grid that is sustainable energy is increasing over time, and then particularly when we add batteries to the mix, that will further increase the rate. So I think we're headed in a positive direction, It's just a question of how long it will take to get there. In fact, like one of the things I really emphasized in the Paris talk was that it is a certainty that we will move to a sustainable energy economy, because the alternative would be to mine all of the carbon-based fuels from the ground, burn them, and then you either move to a sustainable economy or the entire economy collapses because then it doesn't have any energy. So we know for sure that we'll move to a sustainable energy economy. The question is just when and how many billions of tons of CO2 are in the atmosphere versus in the ground.
Right.
That's really the only question is what ppm number will we
stabilize?
Yeah, exactly. Given that we know where we'll end up, which is a sustainable energy economy, it seems like we should terminate this experiment as soon as possible.
Why not go there first?
Right.
I'm sorry, but we don't have time for any more questions. When I was walking in, one of my friends was telling me how excited he was to be here. And I wrote down what he said because I think it's something we all share. He said, "It's such a rare thing to see a person devote themselves to coming up with real solutions to the biggest problems and then doing it." Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah. All right.